Alrighty guys, so it is Kurama here today bringing you guys another Yu Yu Hakusho segment on what is the best saga in Yu Yu Hakusho. And in today's video I'm going to analyze the plot, action, the usage of all characters in the four main sagas, which include the Spirit Detective Saga, the Dark Tournament Saga, the Chapter Black Saga, and the Three Kings Saga. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into which is the best saga in Yu Yu Hakusho. So let me first start off by talking about the Spirit Detective Saga, in which Yusuke Urameshi actually dies in the very first episode. Now I have to say that this saga had a great usage of other characters, as many of these characters assisted Yusuke during his missions. Now we get to see later on that Yusuke becomes the new Spirit Detective, and his apprentice is Botan, who helps him throughout his missions. We also get to see later on that Yusuke Urameshi gets a lot of assistance from other characters as well, which include Kuwabara, which is actually his rival at the very first part of the series. Moving on from Kuwabara, we get to see that Hiei is actually an antagonist at this point in the series as well, as Yusuke fought him trying to save Keiko. Now, moving on from Hiei, we get to see that Kurama is actually a demon who is reincarnated into a human's body. Now, in terms of its fights, during the Genkai tournament, we get to see a great fight between Yusuke and Rando, in which Yusuke almost got killed by piranhas, which was actually quite comical. We also get to see Yusuke's hidden powers come out a little bit against Suzaku, which explains Yusuke's powers later on in the series during the Chapter Black Saga. Now, we also get to see the Kanay Arc, in which he tries to capture Yukina and use her crying to make crystal tears, which also introduced Toguro and his brother, which also sets the tone for the Dark Tournament Saga, as Toguro forces Kuwabara and Yusuke to participate. Now this sets the tone for the Dark Tournament Saga, which actually starts off with a bang. The Dark Tournament Saga was quite interesting, as it starts off with a bunch of fights with demons on a ship, and Genkai disguises herself as the Masked Warrior. We also see a fight with Rinko against Kuwabara, and I do have to say that this saga is all about action. Now the plot is actually quite interesting, but it's actually quite simple. There's a big tournament that's going on that involves a lot of fights, such as Yusuke versus Chu and Kurama versus Karasu. Now this was actually quite an interesting fight, as Kurama actually kills Karasu, but Karasu wins the fight even though he's dead, because Kurama knocked out before Karasu was actually killed, which was actually quite interesting. We also get to see Hiei use his Black Dragon Wave technique, which was actually quite a sight to see. It was also quite interesting to see how Hiei actually didn't kill Bui, even though he had a great opportunity to do so. Now we also get to see a great fight between Yusuke and Toguro, in which Yusuke actually had to give it everything he had, along with being motivated by the death of Kuwabara, which actually wasn't a death, and Genkai. Now one thing I have to say about the saga is Toguro as a character was quite interesting, as he was actually a human who wanted to become a demon because of the fact that he couldn't protect his human trainees, which was quite interesting to see. We also get to see that Toguro has a dark past with Genkai, but they also had a lovely relationship. Now we move on to the Chapter Black Saga, in which we see Yusuke was kidnapped by a bunch of high school thugs who were trying to persuade him and his friends to use their minds over their skills. I have to say this was quite interesting, and Kurama had a great fight against Kaito, even though it wasn't physical at all. It was a fight of the minds, and it was something interesting to see besides the basic generic fights. Now Shinobu Century has to be arguably the best villain in the entire series, as he's a spirit detective too, and we see later on that he becomes evil because of the human atrocities that were committed, and that Itsuki was actually his partner in crime like Botan. We also get to see a great character in Sniper and Seaman, especially Sniper, who actually almost killed Yusuke, even though he's a lot weaker than Yusuke was. Another interesting fight was Kurama versus Gourmet, in which Kurama actually reveals that Gourmet was actually the elder Toguro who had taken over his body, and how Kurama tortured him with the death plant for eternity. Now we also get to see King Yama, which was actually quite interesting to see. And in addition to King Yama, we also get to see Yusuke emerge into the Mazoku, which was actually a great fight against Sensui, even though he was possessed. This actually led the groundwork for the very next saga, in which we learn about Yusuke's ancestor, Raizen, who was a great character in the series. So moving on to the Three Kings arc, we get to learn that Yusuke, Kurama, and Hiei would now become the new Three Kings, following Raizen, Mukuru, and Yomi. Now I have to say that this saga had a great usage of characters, but this saga was mainly about character development in my opinion. Now we get to see more about Hiei's development as a character, as we get to see him and how he got the Jigan Eye and how he's actually from an ice clan. Now we also get to see Raizen and how he's essentially starving himself for thousands and thousands and thousands of years because he had made love with a human, and when she died he had changed his ways. Now moving on from Raizen, we also get to see that Mukuru actually has a very, very, very dark past which she shares with Hiei, and it also makes a great connection to how Hiei was actually able to listen to Mukuru, which was interesting. Another thing I have to say is in terms of the fighting, Shiguru vs. Kurama was quite an interesting fight, as Shiguru was the guy who gave Hiei the Jigan Eye, and how Shiguru gave up his life after he had lost. Now Hiei's fight with Mukuru was actually quite awesome, and it wasn't quite determined who was the actual victor, as it seemed like both of them had somewhat surrendered. Yusuke's fight against Yomi was actually an amazing fight as well, but unfortunately Yusuke had lost. So I'm sure you guys are wondering, what is the best saga of all? And I had to think very hard about this, but the best saga in Yu Yu Hakusho is the Chapter Black Saga. Because of the fact that its fighting with intelligence and brutality makes this fight quite interesting, especially learning about Game Master. Also, the fact that Yusuke Urameshi actually died and he had to have his ancestor unlock his powers, which was quite interesting too. But most importantly, Shinobu Century as a character himself and his 7 personalities was just way too awesome. So guys, that's been my video for today. That's what I think is the best saga in Yu Yu Hakusho. Please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe, and remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.